Hey everybody, Caleb here, back again with more Red Knot. This time we are reading the book Heresy, book 1 of something about like a water world by Aslam Audley. I so fail at names. I have the second book behind me, and that actually has the name of the series on it, but I'm lazy and I'm not going to grab it. I really like the cover. It's really nice and fantasy inspired. It's got, like a moon or something in the background, and then like this huge castle looking thing on like an island, and then it's got some bridges, and then it's got some boats and stuff, like I guess on port or something. I'm not really sure, but it looks cool. The back cover, just a different shot of the same thing on the front, except like zoomed in on this pyramid looking thing and flipped so that it looks like a different part of the castle, I guess. Praise for Aslam, Audrey, and Heresy. This tale has been compared with J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. The Guardian. An action-packed plot. Western Daily Press. So, I'm hoping for some good fantasy. I don't know about you. Let's read the inside flap so we can actually know what this is about. All across the water world of Aqua Silva. Clever, I'm sure. Change is being fought and ruthlessly suppressed by the domain and its ferocious holy warriors, the Sakrai. Sakri? I'm gonna call them Sakrai. If the people of Aqua Silva have any hope of survival, the domain must be stopped. Amid the perpetually raging storms plaguing the mineral-starved world, young Cathan, son of a powerful count, travels to inform his father of a crucial discovery of an iron ore cache in their lands. En route to the clan congress where his father waits, Cathan unwittingly stumbles upon a domain-engineered plot to unleash a firestorm of oppression upon the world. Cathan is thrust into events beyond his control, forced to become an unwilling agent of change. A way must be found to break the ruthless grip of the domain, and Cathan begins to understand the daunting scope of what lies ahead in a long and deadly struggle for liberation. Extraordinary first-time novelist in Anselm. Oh my gosh, I so fail at this person's name. Anselm Audley. It sounds like I'm saying oddly instead of trying to pronounce it with an A. Has crafted a fiercely intelligent, lightning-paced, and ambitious fantasy saga that mines the contrary natures of evil and good, fire and water, stasis and change. My bad. A richly dramatic evocation of an epic struggle that often mirrors pointed comparison to our own real-life culture wars. I'd rather just read a fantasy novel for the sake of it being a fantasy novel, but okay. This astonishing first volume of Audrey's Heresy trilogy. Okay, I guess it's the Heresy trilogy. Whatever. Introduces. Well, I'm sure their story is filled with douches, but we have yet to decide that, because we haven't actually read it. Introduces one of the most exciting voices for the new millennium. Okay, and the other flap is just about the author. Oh, okay, the author is 19 years old by the time they wrote and published this book, and is just beginning his college education at Oxford. Heresy is his first novel, so this shall be interesting to see if this goes anywhere. Just for a reference of how old he probably is now, When was this published? Okay, 2001. I was wondering because it said New Millennium, and I'm like, well, it's probably not too old. So it's like, what, 13 years old or something by this point? Acknowledgements, continents, archipelago, let's see here. Part 1, The Journey. Chapter 1. Iron! Iron! The shout drifted up through the forest out of the tumult ahead. Near the entrance to the gem mines, birds settled in the branches of the cedar trees, shrilled and rose from their perches. I urged my horses on, the wheels of the chariot stirring up clouds of fine dust from the path beneath me. Then I pulled on the reins, slowing the chariot down as the path twisted abruptly around a tree. Have I mentioned how much I despise first person? I think I've talked about this before, but I don't like first person very much. Why? Because I wouldn't be doing this crap. Ahead of me, the trees gave way to grass, falling away down the slopes of the foothills. To the right was the stone wall around the compound of the gem mines, its guard towers deserted. I could see a large knot of people in the entranceway, where the gates hung wide open. What were they doing there? Had there been an accident? A riot? That was all we needed. As I slowed down in the empty space of the killing field... The killing field? What's that? Is that a place where you take disobedient people who didn't want to work that day and just slaughter them? And then stuff their bodies somewhere? What's a killing field? Is that a mining term? I don't know. Around the mines and wheeled the chariot around. They spotted me. I stopped the chariot a few feet from them. A tall man, one of only a few wearing robes rather than laborers' tunics, stepped out of the crowd as they turned toward me, excitement showing on his face. It wasn't a riot then, or an accident. Escount? Is this a thing, or is this just made up stuff because it's a fantasy world? Which, made up stuff is okay, it's just, I don't know if Escount is an actual thing or not. Escount Cathan. I don't care if I change the pronunciation of it, it's going to happen because I'm dumb. Escount Cathan, it's fortunate that you have arrived. May Ranthos be with you. His beard was cut quite short, and his oiled hair was overlaid with powdery dust. His face was thin and gaunt, his eyes deep sunk, but alight with the same interest as the others. "What's all the commotion, Moll?" I asked. "What's so important that work's been interrupted, with the ship due to arrive any day now?" Any day now, that was, as long as the Coriolis, I guess that's what that is, Coriolis storm out over the ocean dissipated soon. It was the 2nd this month, and the ship had already been delayed once. "Master, we have found iron. The priest of Branthas, who offered to help our mining operations, has discovered a huge seam of the red ore." I almost refused to believe him at first. Iron? Had we been sitting on top of one of the most valuable commodities of all for these last few ailing months and neglected it? Iron was in short supply across Aquasilva. The floating islands? Okay. The floating islands simply didn't hold enough of the ore to meet the demands of the steel foundries, and ultimately of the continent's armies. After flamewood and its derivatives, iron was the most highly prized of all the raw materials. "Is this certain?" I demanded, keeping my face impassive. I didn't want to show too much excitement in front of the mine workers. "Because me being as excited as they are about the possibility of a rare find..." "Really? You're not going to be all that excited that maybe this is actually a thing that you guys have? Considering how rare it is, you're just going to be like, yeah, okay, it was alright." In answer, Moll called to some in the throng. There wasn't as many of them as I thought at first. About 12 or 15 people were clustered there, mostly overseers and foremen. Someone at the back tossed a lump of rock over their heads. Maul deftly caught it and handed it to me. One of the horses whickered as I turned the rock over in my hand, noting the gray-black crystals in it. Is it mineable? The priest thinks so. He's in the mine with Haluk. Someone come and hold the reins, I said. One of the men moved over and took them, and I stepped out of the chariot. Shouldn't it be stepped off? Though I guess you are kind of boxed in when you are in a chariot. Take me to the priest, I said to Mal. The rest of you continue with your work. A path opened for me to pass through them. Mal led me across the court inside the palisade. There were buildings along one side, and the open cast trenches on the other. Opposite us yawned the black hole of the mine entrance. I wasn't particularly fond of going in there. I hate caves. Then why did somebody send you there to oversee this crap? But this was important, so I'd have to try not to think about being underground. This gemstone mine was the principal reason for the existence of Clan Lepidor, the northernmost of the 15 clans on the continent of Oceanus, and by a small margin the northernmost continental clan in the world. There hadn't been a city here before the Tuontar War, but 158 years ago a prospecting party had discovered rich gem seams, and shortly afterward a group of ocean and archipelagian refugees had settled in the area and founded a new clan. We were rather lucky, in fact. There were rich fishing grounds nearby, and the mountains gave better than usual protection from the storms, allowing a lush forest to grow up along the coast. I was glad of that. It made Lepidor territory a lot less bleak than the lands of some of the more southerly clans, which were too exposed for trees to grow there, and hence were very depressing places to be. Because there wouldn't be a few genetically modified trees. You know, that's what evolution is for. Stuff adapts. And there might not be a lot of trees, but there'd be some. I'm sure there would be. My house had been in power since its founding. After some distant ancestor or other, I'm not really sure because nobody but taught me this, or I didn't really give two shits when I was supposed to be learning it, had performed an extraordinary service for the city, and the other houses had unanimously chosen him to lead them. At least that was the official story, but I'm not really sure. It was something like that or other. It sounded rather dubious to me, and I guess the reality had been somewhat less honorable. Still, that was history now, and my father, Count... Oh my goodness, the words here. Alnabal II was known as one of the most upstanding of the present 15 counts of Oceanus. I don't know, and I don't care. The problem for us at the moment was that over the last few years, the price of gemstones had been dropping and the mine had become less profitable, and in recent months the Count and the merchants had been struggling to make ends meet. We could survive, of course, without the mine. There was fertile farmland along the coast and extensive fisheries for food, and the forests would supply us with wood and keep some exports going. But without the gems there was nothing worthwhile to trade, and so Clan Lepidor would degenerate into a farming combine not fit to be called a clan, because that's the only thing that makes a clan is gemstones. And since I didn't want to inherit a mere combine, because I'm an asshole and don't appreciate the work of my forefathers and my people that, I'm technically the count of, nor see my clan's fortunes plummet, because it's not like I could work my ass off like these men that work under me do, or try to discover, new gem mines or anything like that. I'd been as worried about the future as anyone. Until now. My head was suddenly full of possibilities. If there was enough iron, and it could be exploited, we'd be rich again as soon as the first cargo was sold in the markets of Oceanus' capital, Farasa. We might even be able to sign a contract with a great house to carry it across the ocean to Tanith, Aqua Silia's trading capital. It was a long journey, and I knew it was much more dangerous, but the iron prices would be much higher there. I ducked under the wooden framework of the gateway and into the tunnel of the mine, lit by 3 flame-wood torches. I heard 2 voices a little way ahead. Steam extends out for hundreds of feet, I tell you. I know the rock around here, Domini, I guess, and there's no possible way it can. The voice of the mine's manager, Haluk Iti, coarser than the smooth, modulated tones of the priest of Ranthus. Haluk had been exiled from Ma's Fairness 2 years ago after a quarrel with a merchant, and would spend another year supervising Lepidor's mines before we lost him again to his homeland. It would be a pity, despite his abrasive bitterness, he was a good manager. Ah, it's Count Cathan, the priest said. As he saw me, his face was in shadow. Haluk, who was standing with his back to the entrance, swung around. Doubtless you've heard, he said. I have found myself forced to disagree with, Domine... Oh, dear Lord, the names! Domine Istik, despite all his wisdom on the extent of the deposit. Priests were always called, the domain. I don't know why I was trying to sound domini. A title from the old tongue. What's the difference in your estimates? I asked Haluk. His are twice as large as mine. Is the mine workable with your figures? By all means. Domain, domini, I don't know. I'm gonna pick one. The domini will tell you, he said gruffly. My calculations are rough guesses, you understand. Domini Istik said, but I would estimate you have enough here to sell 10,000 quartons worth every month for more than a century and a half. I attempted to calculate the resulting profit figures in my head, but failed. I was never good at mental arithmetic. I don't think that's spelled right. But then again, it is a fantasy novel, so I expect some words to look weird. Although I could work sums out easily enough on paper. Your annual expenses amount to around 2,000, as Count Cathan Istik said. 8,000 left over, at least 4 remaining after other expenses such as tithes and a merchant's cut. A sideways reminder there that we'd have to pay their dues to Domain Temple again. Dues that had been waived this last year to help our survival. Lepidor's Avarch, while not native-born, had been in charge of the temple for 26 years, and was more of a Lepidoran than a priest now. He was always very helpful and considerate. Those calculations are made with Haluk's estimates? Yes, with mine. You can go on mining for 3 centuries. I wasn't worried. Either way, we get back and profit. You'll need to hire trained iron miners from Farsa, and they're much in demand. A contract as well with some merchant from Farsa or Teneth. Don't forget the Cambrasian Admiralty. Admiralty? Yeah, I guess I said that right. I said, remembering the third possible market. But Istik looked doubtful. Will you come back to the city for supper? I added. Thank you for the offer, but I'll stay here a while longer to see if we can find out the exact extent of these deposits. Istik bowed, and I returned the courtesy before turning around and making my way back up the tunnel, cursing as I almost cracked my head on one of the wooden support beams. Mal followed me. I blinked as we emerged again into the bright sunlight of the yard, now resounding again with a dull thudding sound as the gem miners broke up the ore with flame-wood hammers, melting away what wasn't pure gemstone. At least that was what I remembered my tutor telling me. I really didn't pay attention when I was in school. You can tell that by now, can't you? I found the whole mining process even less interesting than theology lessons. It had nothing to do with the sea. "Will you be going back to the city now, Lord Cathan?" Mal asked. "Yes," I replied. "Work should continue as normal for the rest of the day. Haluk is to come to me with some figures this evening. I need some hard facts before I take any action." Actually, it was my mother, effective regent in my father's absence, who would make any decisions. Not yet of age, I wasn't experienced enough to take full charge of the Count's duties while my father was away, and so I sat on the dais with the first adviser whispering Countess Iria's advice into my ear. I'd actually been trying to pay more attention to statecraft lessons since my father left, because it was galling not to know how to make my own decisions. But we're still not going to drop about what your age is. It's just that you're not old enough. I went back across the courtyard, the count yard. Yes, the count yard. And under the gate, noting that its towers were once again occupied by watchers who could survey the surrounding hillsides for traces of barbarian raiding forces. Not that they were likely to find any. There was only one pass into the mountains within the city's territory, and it was well guarded, as were the coastal approaches. The man to whom I'd entrusted my chariot handed me the reins. I hadn't taken my wrist guards off, so I curled the reins around my forearm, flicked the whip, and moved off along the path toward the city. I didn't get back into the chariot, I just took the reins, and then my horses dragged me behind them. Somehow I lived. It was an exhilarating feeling, rushing along the road behind the perfectly trained two-horse team, because I wasn't in the chariot, and the speed more than compensated for the jolt, as the wheels went over loose stones or shallow potholes. The road was beginning to show signs of disrepair, and I saw one or two holes big enough to lose a wheel in. It would need a team of road masons with proper tools to carry out repairs. That was, if we had enough money for the flame wood. Well, the iron should solve that problem, I reflected. The path straightened when I reached the main valley. As I passed between huge cedars interspersed with stretches of clear land, one or twice I passed horse-drawn wood carts manned by lumberjacks, carrying logs from the logging sites on the slopes. Then the road curved around and the trees fell away as I came out opposite Lipitor. The city was built on a promontory with a lagoon to the east, my right serving as the city's harbor. To the west, the coastline curved away, a long vista of farmland and stands of acacias, gently sloping down to a long sandy shore. Shining stone-built walls erected across the end of the promontory protected the city. I could see the houses of the land quarter just beyond them. Lipitor wasn't a big city. The last census, carried out for tax purposes 2 years ago, had shown just under 2,000 citizens. Well, that's really not that big at all. What it lacked in size, however, made up for in cleanliness and the quality of its architecture. I'd seen most of the other cities on the continent, and even allowing for my loyalty to Lipitor as my home, I thought it was the best of communities, its buildings the most beautiful. Every building inside the walls that ringed the outside of the promontory was built of the local white stone, and many stretched to 3 stories. From every roof above the colonnaded windows of the first floor, a verdant garden sprouted, rooted in earth that had mostly been carried up by hand. There were some things that even flame wood couldn't do. 1 or 2 of the larger dwellings had small domes on the roofs. In the surface harbor, also protected by walls, I could see warehouses and wharves, the masts of 9 or 10 fishing ships, and over to one side a small domed building. Small domed building, not doomed. What am I talking about? The top of Lipitor's undersea harbor, where Mantas docked and Lipitor's single home station undersea warship was kept. I raced across the green open space that lay before the city and through the gates of the land quarter, the outermost of the city's 3 districts. The guards, both of whom I recognized, waved cheerily, and I waved back to them as I sped through. I had to slow down inside the gate, but at least the main street led almost straight through the gates of the other 2 quarters, Palace and Seaward. All 3 districts were circular and protected by their own set of walls. They had to be, for proper shielding from the storms. That was another reason I was glad to live here, because the storms were less severe. Our walls could be lowered and weren't the dark towering monstrosities of some other cities. I passed the internal gate to the palace quarter, where the main marketplace and official buildings were, as well as my home, the palace. The royal palace, more of a mansion than a palace really, stood at the end of the main street, only a couple of 100 feet away. Both sides of the street were lined with shops, each one with an awning extending out of its front. Their counters were spread with wares whose holders nodded cheerily at the slow-moving chariot. I maneuvered my horses around the fat, green-robed bulk of the merchant Shihab, who was bargaining ferociously with his friend, the shield engineer. "A fine day, is it not?" Shihab called, turning from his haggling. "You look happy." "Believe me, I am," I said, and so will you be. When the money begins to flow again, the story of the discovery would be all over the city by nightfall, so it wouldn't do any harm if I planted the first rumors of it. I spurred the horses on before Shiap had a chance to inquire further. Let whoever Haluk sent to spread the news have the pleasure of telling the citizens what had happened. I slowed twice more to greet people before I reached the small square in front of the palace. The stables were hidden away on one side, against the outer walls. Downwind, of course. Yes, because I wouldn't want to smell horse crap, Jenna. And I handed over the chariot to a servant who ran out to take the reins. I unknotted the thongs of my wrist guards and left them in the chariot, along with the whip. My father didn't like riding equipment laying around in the palace. "Are you a slob? Why would you do that anyway?" 2 guards sat inside the gate of the palace, as usual, gambling with copper coins. They waved me cheerily past. Why is everything cheerily? I think you could use a different word by now, my friend. Cheerily past and into the small court of the palace. It wasn't more than 30 feet across, with a flight of stairs leading up one side and plants growing in spaces between the paving stones. At one side was the door to the banquet hall and the council chamber, and the servants' door was set in the base of the stairs. Again, it was much smaller than, say, Lexon's palace in Kalaman, but it was far more friendly, and, for me, home. I ran up the stairs 3 at a time. That would be rather difficult, almost hitting my head again on the beams that supported the tiled roof. "Where's my mother?" I asked the first servant I saw in the whitewashed hallway at the top. "In the upper council chamber with the first advisor, master." I slowed my pace to a fast walk along the tiled corridor. Voices came from within the closed door of the 3rd room on the left, and I knocked. "Who's there?" came my mother's rich, contralto voice. "It's me," I said. "Come in, then," because I wouldn't be like, "It's your son," or something like that. But anyway, I pushed open the cedarwood door and went inside. The council chamber was a large room with a whitewood table in the center. This was the secret council chamber. Open meetings were held in the main hall, because we'd never been able to afford a proper conclave room. There were 12 chairs around the table, one with a red canopy. My mother was sitting in it, while the first advisor sat in the first chair on the right-hand side. "What is it?" my mother asked, seeing straight through the composed look I tried to keep on my face. In her youth she'd been accounted beautiful, and, now past 40, she still looked impressive. "If you thought otherwise, your mother would have went over to you and smacked you silly." Her long hair, an unusual dark blonde, was tied up at the back, and she looked proud and regal. She wore a long gown of white and green. "I drove past the mine while I was exercising my horses. They've found enough iron there to give us I tried to remember the figures, 4,000 carton profit for the next century." "Iron?" Attack half rose from his seat, because only now will I say the first advisor guy is, this is his name. Our first advisor was my mother's cousin, 3 years younger than her. He'd come with her when she married my father, because her father, a Tech's guardian, had had enough of his nephew's wild reputation. I'd never seen that side of him, and all my mother's relations agreed that he turned into a sensible man and a good advisor. He'd been employed as my father's first advisor and chancellor since his predecessor's death 2 years ago. I didn't like to be disrespectful to the dead, but I preferred Atek to the dour, vinegary Philisette. Atek was brown-haired and broadly built, though I'd noticed he was getting fat due to lack of exercise. He wore a white robe with red decoration belted at the waist. "Iron," I confirmed. Dominique... who cares how I'm pronouncing this? It keeps changing. Dominique, Estique, and Haluk were quite certain, though they can't agree whether the supply will last 1.5 or 3 centuries. "How come we never discovered this before?" Atek said, sinking back into his chair, his expression dazed. "Because we never had a trained minor priest before," my mother said. "That was a section of the hill we'd never tested before he arrived. It had been sheer luck that we'd gained Dominique Estique. Is it supposed to be Estique? Because I've just been pronouncing it weird. Estique's service in the first place. He'd been one of the 3 survivors from a manta that had been destroyed by a whirlpool off Isles End Cape 3 months ago. Once he'd recovered, he'd offered to do some prospecting at our mine to keep him busy until another manta arrived from his original destination, Mons Ferris, to collect him. I hadn't had much contact with him, although it had been one of my undersea probes that had detected his powerless escape ship floating out toward the open ocean. It had been a triumph for me, though, because I'd at last proved to my father that all the time I spent in the sea or with the ocean geographers did have some value. "I ordered Haluk to have some definite figures for us this evening," I said. "Domaine Estique would rather stay out there until nightfall, as he always has." "You did well," my mother said, a warm smile lighting up her face. "We have to send word to Count Elnabal," Atek said, coming to the same conclusions as Estique had. "We'll need to sign a cargo contract with some merchant of Tanith we've already established this. You don't have to go over it again. Just say they said basically the same thing we did back at the mine, and then go on with it. To carry the iron to the foundries. Could we set up a smithing industry here?" My mother wondered aloud. "If we made the iron into weapons before shipping it off, the profit would double." "It'd make us a major target for pirates, though," Atek reminded her. "Until we have the money to build proper defenses, it would be better merely to sell the iron. I will suggest that course to your husband." "Where do you think is the best place to sell the iron?" I asked. "Tanith," Atek said immediately. My mother agreed with him, and I was fairly certain that my father would have the same idea. Of the other 2 possible markets, Farasa, however you say that, was closer and safer, but the prices were comparatively low, since there was little demand there. Oceanus already had an operating mine, so there wouldn't be much of a market for our metal in that place either. The other possibility was the one Istique hadn't seemed to like the sound of Cumbres on the continent of New Hyperion. Wait, so we're in Borderlands now? What the crap? But the journey there was almost twice as far as the one to Tanith, and the profit margins would be far smaller. Also, the route to Cambras passed very close to the territory of our deadly enemy, Count Lexian of Colomon. Who do we send? My mother said. Elnabal only left 2 weeks ago, and the council never lasts less than a month. This one might, Atek said. The Halatites were pressing on the borders of the cities of Equotia, so many of the counts there will be anxious to get home, which means we must decide before the trading ship arrives. Whoever goes will have to be quick at Farasa and get passage on one of the military mantas, making the courier run from there to Tanith. I should go, Atek said. I need you here, my mother reminded him. There's no one else we can send. There must be. What about entrusting a package to someone who was planning to go anyway? No one of high enough stature. None of the bigger merchants were planning to go. Atek looked at me suddenly. On the other hand, as long as he is escorted, Catherine could go. I felt a thrill. I'd been hoping against hope that somebody would mention me, and wondering whether I should suggest myself. I knew before she spoke that my mother wouldn't like the idea, though. No, she said. He's supposedly in charge of his father in his father's absence. Without him, everyone will know I'm ruling, and that'll hardly endear us to the domain. Because they're assholes. Everyone knows already, Atek reminded her. Besides, his brother can serve as a figurehead. His brother is only 5 years old, and had that fact escaped you. Shouldn't that be has, but whatever. My mother said sharply, what if there's another storm like the one 3 months ago, and Catherine's ship was struck as well? What do I tell my husband then? If Elnabal gets no word, he'll have to make the journey to Tanith again, at the time of year when Lexin and our other enemies can take advantage of any weakness. And that will be far more dangerous. Either I or Catherine must go. There aren't any alternatives. I would prefer if you went, Atek, she said after a pause. I decided this was the time to speak up for myself, before my mother decided in favor of Atek. Mother, I need experience of Tanith before I go to my first council meeting, and of Equotura. I fail at words. All the courtiers' sons have already gone. Courtiers was one of our aliases. My reasoning was sound, I knew, and my father would have given me leave without hesitation, but my mother was always so overprotective. Yeah? How old are you? Oh, wait, we didn't bother to say. I saw her looking at me as Atek nodded sagely. Is your heart set on going, then? Yes! I saw a brief flicker of doubt on her face, but then she said, very well. I was too conscious of my dignity to leap in the air and shout something, but inwardly I was pleased as could be. Clan heirs needed to have seen some of the rest of the world before they succeeded to their posts, and I felt that, so far, I hadn't seen enough. I was due to spend a year or two away from home quite soon, to learn how politics, trade, and religion actually worked. Because I'm not already religious and would have some idea of that, the same thing going for politics and trade. How old are you again? Oh, we didn't say. Get a grounding in oceanography and find out how to sail mantas and surface ships. It was an apprenticeship that all clan aristocrats and leading merchants' sons went through, but so far there had been no indication of when I was going. Not that I needed to learn anything about ships or oceanography. I'd spent nearly as much of my life in the water as on land, which was why my father was concerned that the rest of my education was falling behind. But he'd never been able to keep me away from the sea for very long. The farthest I'd ever gone from Leapdor was Farasa. See, the reason why I keep pausing on Farasa is because I keep wanting to say Farasa, and I'm just like, no, I'm not putting ass anywhere in this story. unless the word ass comes up. Oceanus' capital 2 years ago. I could have gone to the great conference with my father last time it happened 3 years ago, but I'd been ill. Firenze was a mighty city, but it was still on my home continent of Oceanus, and I never crossed the ocean. And the obvious destination across the ocean was Tanith, one of the 2 greatest and richest cities on all of Aquasilva, where it was said a manta entered or left port every hour, and a sailing ship every 5 minutes. Tanith was Aquasilva's merchant capital, and somewhere I'd always wanted to go. Who shall we send as escort? Iria asked. Shouldn't that be like my mother asked? Someone who has crossed the ocean, someone we can trust. Because I don't have people like that in the palace that I see every day and openly trust to watch my son for me when I'm not able to, or he's out and about. Hasn't one of the acolytes from the temple been called to train in the holy city? I believe so. A promising young man who's been to New Hyperion and Equotria. We'll send 2 guards with them. I'll arrange it with the high priest. Do it now, my mother ordered. Atek stood up, bowed to both of us, and left the room, closing the door again behind him. It will be a long journey, the Countess said, because the Countess is not my mother, even though she is, so I should just say Mom said. And going by sea, there is very little to do. Learn what you can from the acolyte, both about the world and the faith of the domain. If he proves to be a fanatic, don't let yourself be taken in by his teaching. There should be a balance in the world, and sacking the lands of those who don't conform, as the priesthood does, is not right. He stood up. Yes, my mother suddenly changed sex. She stood up and went over to the window. Atek is right. You've seen too little of the world. What you've seen of the priesthood is all that is good about it. We are too small a city to warrant anything more than a temple with 4 priests and 10 acolytes. But in the capital and the other great cities, and in the priesthood's lands around the holy city in Equotria, there are thousands of warrior priests. They're zealots, priests who can fight better than most other men, who believe in the cleansing power of fire and the sword. The Prime sends them out against those who don't believe in Ranthus. Cities and whole peoples have been destroyed by them. They're called the Sacri, the sacred ones. My mother almost spat out the last words. I had never seen her so emotional. She was usually very calm and collected, except on the few occasions when she argued with my father. I tried to make sense of what my mother was saying. Who does one worship if not Ranthus? Before I tell you, you must swear never to reveal what I disclose to you to anyone, or even hint that you know about it. Not even your brother. Most certainly not the acolyte. She seemed nervous in a way I had never seen before, fiddling with her girdle. Swear on what? On clan honor. By my heritage and the clan of my birth, and by the continuation of our house, I swear to keep what I now learn secret and hidden from all the world, I said. Then I waited. What is the domain's religion based on? She asked. Confused, it took me a second to answer. I'd been expecting her to tell me something, not ask a blindingly obvious question. Ranthus, the embodiment of fire from which all life comes. I took the passage directly from the primers the Arvarch had used to teach me. And his gift, Aquasilvia, is? Tell me from the Catechism. Flamewood is Ranthus' gift, I recited, one of the homilies drummed into everyone as a child by the priests of the temple. Learning them had to count as the most boring thing I've ever done. It gives heat and light and power to Aquasilva, and through it the will of God is channeled. Through Flamewood we cross the seas, and keep away the storms. With it we make war and peace, all by Ranthus' bounty. Fire is an element, isn't it? She said. Of course. Fire, earth, air, water, light, and shadow. But fire is the dominant one, and the one that holds Aquasilva together, with its dominion over light. And it's the only one that endows men with the gift of magic, to heal and destroy. course. So why do none of the other elements have gods, or magic? Flame wood may be vital, but we need water to keep us alive, air to breathe, and earth to grow our crops in. And without shadow there is no night. Fire is the creator, I said stubbornly, still unsure of what my mother was talking about. Catherine, fire is but one of 6 elements. Light and shadow not exactly being elements, but I'm going with this. Each of the others has its own deity, its own magic, its own power. Some are potentially far more powerful and far kinder than the fire god. Don't we live on the surface of an endless ocean that makes up most of Aquasilva? That ocean is the domain of Theus, goddess of water. The void, the heavens beyond the storms, surpassing even the oceans in size, is the home of Shadow, and its spirit, Ragnar. Then there is Earth and its ruler, Hyperius, after whom New Hyperion was originally named. Althana, goddess of the winds, and Pathian, god of light, are the other 2. All of these have history of worship as old as fire itself, and once they were freely tolerated. The Thetan Empire was founded on the worship of Thetis. Her voice was no less compelling for the heresy of her words, but I found what she was saying a staggering concept to take in. Anyone found worshipping the other elemental deities is burned alive in the main square of their city. Even to know of them is dangerous. My mother's voice had descended to a whisper. I don't ask anything other than that you keep what I have told you in mind, and that you look upon the works of Ranthus in the knowledge that other powers can accomplish the same thing, without needing to be supreme. This is the opposite of everything I have been taught, I protested. Teaching is the key to control, she said. Remember your oath to the clan. I will, I promised, standing up. Her voice rose to its normal pitch again as she, too, stood up. You must prepare for your journey, and bid farewell to your friends, and my brother. How good of you to remember him, my mother said, opening the door, because my mother was stupid and forgot him too, which is why I mentioned him. We walked out into the passage beyond and headed for the open door. At the far end of the corridor, which led out onto the small roof garden overlooking the sea, the sky was virtually cloudless, only small white wisps marred its azure expanse, and the sea rippled beneath the light breeze. That night I found a small scrap of paper with a passage in my mother's handwriting laying under my pillow. At the top she had written an instruction not to take it with me, for to be caught with it was death. I memorized it before I dropped it in the furnace, though. From a chronicle written by the last Thetan high priest of the old religion. And so it was that I stood by my brother's memorial, looking out over the empty ocean toward the continents that had once been green and were now shattered wastelands. I have often wondered if this would have happened if my father had lived, but then I remember the insistent wars between ourselves we went through before all this. We have lost a world, but now we have a chance for a lasting peace and a new beginning. I only hope that Ateus' shade can rest in peace, and that we shall stay true to the vision so many have died for. I will never be able to fight or wield magic again, and even now I cannot walk up from the harbor without Cenari's help. Although I may recover some of my strength, it is my son and my nephew who lead Vita now, and I hope that they will have the chance to forge a better world than I have ever lived in. Hail and farewell, Carnarius Tar Conator. It didn't sound like the writings of the Carosius we'd been told about, brother of the archdemon Aetius, who'd plunged Aquasilva into a terrible war. I wondered what my mother meant by it, and where it had come from. The quays of the surface harbor were still glistening wet from the last storm when I boarded the trade barque? I'm just going to say barque. Harasor, 2 days later, along with most of my escort. Squall, a gorilla-like guardsman, was carrying all the luggage, while his more normal-sized companion, Karak, sauntered along behind. 3 small chunks of iron ore wrapped in canvas lay at the bottom of my bag, the safest place I could find. They were the precious samples we'd need to negotiate a contract. As we walked across the slippery stone surface, the Parasaur's captain appeared at the top of the gangway and beckoned us to come up. I noticed the planks shaking as I stepped on them. It seemed Bombard didn't have the money for repairs any more than we did. "Welcome on board, Lord Cathan. It is an honor to have you traveling on my ship." "Thank you," I nodded to Saul, who grinned and took the bags down the aft companionway that the ship's master had indicated. Bomar was a lean, spiky man with a beard that was quite short for one of his station, and he was dressed in a brown robe that had seen better days. He'd commanded the Parasaur for as long as I could remember. It was the ship that made the regular run along the coast to buy the monthly cargoes of gem from Lipitor, wine from Kula, and various other products from the small settlements on the islands along the route. These would then be sold for a higher price in Farsa, although the profit margin for the gems had been dropping rapidly recently, and Bomar had been muttering about not coming any more. However, with the news of the iron mine's discovery, he'd doubtless been calculating the possible gains he could make. Although we couldn't use his ship for transporting the ore, Lipitor's population would grow, and he'd have more people to sell to. "Could I ask, sir, where is the priest? It is imperative that we leave soon as possible, or we won't make the anchorage at Hulka before nightfall." I turned and scanned the harbor, wondering where my traveling companion had got to, then saw 2 red-robed figures walking quickly down the street that led to the wharves. One was the frail figure of the old Arvarch, Lipitor's high priest. The other, carrying a bag over his shoulder, had to be the acolyte Sharhandan. As they quickened their steps, coming around the edge of the basin, I looked back at the palace again, where the bushes on the sea balcony waved slightly in the breeze. I could see my mother standing there, dressed in a dark green robe, with the small shape of my brother Jaren by her side. She didn't wave, but I saw her incline her head, and I waved in response. "I'm very sorry we're late," the Arvach said, as he reached the foot of the gangplank, pushing Sharhadan up it with a gentle hand. "It's no trouble, Pontifex, I assure you," Bomar said deferentially. Yeah, I guess. Moving smoothly aside to let Sharhadan on board. Pontifex was an Arvach's title. "I don't believe you," the Arvach said jovially. "May Rathus be with you." He turned to Sharhadan, who was leaning over the rail across the gangway from me. "And with you too, Sharhadan. It's been a pleasure teaching you, and I'm sure you're destined for great things in the Holy City. Come and visit us before they make you Prime." Prime was the title of the most senior priest of all, higher even than the Exarches, who had supreme power over each continent in the domain. Evidently Sharhadan had shown ambition for them even to joke about such a thing. But if the Avarch liked Sharhadan, I couldn't help feeling that I would too. The Avarch was one of my tutors, and the most interesting of them, even if his subject was boring. The Avarch waved and walked away along the wharf, calling down blessing on the workers laboring there. Almost immediately, Bomar ordered that the gangplank pulled on board and the mooring ropes untied. Sailors ran across the deck as the harbor cutter's trailing rope was attached to the Parasaur's bow, ready to tow her out into the open sea. "Let's be going," Bomar called, and the beating of the drum sounded from ahead. I walked forward to the bow as fast as I could and leaned over the gunwale to the right of where the prow reared up, the mast rope securely fastened to it. Ahead, the tug cutter was increasing its stroke, the oars beating faster on the port side as the ship turned to face the harbor entrance. As we moved out across the harbor, I looked back at Lipitor again, as the workshops and taverns around the harbor. The familiar sights seemed even more vivid now. Now I was leaving them for 3 months. The familiar sight seemed even more vivid now. There should be like as in there. The familiar sight seemed even more vivid now as I was leaving them for 3 months. I'd never been away for that long before, to go to the other side of the world. 1 or 2 people standing on the dock waved at me as we cleared the harbor entrance. Then the cutter fell away, and Parasaur's captain ordered the sail set for Holka anchorage. The boat began to rock with the motion of the small waves, but that wasn't a problem. I'd never been seasick. "It's always rather daunting leaving home," said a voice to my left. "But look on the bright side. You'll probably be back here soon. I may never return." I turned abruptly to find Shahardin standing there, a friendly smile on his face. The hood of his acolyte's robe was thrown back, revealing an alert, lively face, brown hair and dancing green eyes. "Who are you? Heavens, I should know you. You're Catherine," Chardon said, "getting forgetful in my old age." I laughed. "If you're old, what does that make the Arvach?" "Good question," the acolyte countered. "A ghost of a ghost? Do such things exist in higher theology?" "I wouldn't know. Still, he's a nice old relic." My first impression had been right. I liked Shahardin. The acolyte had a quick wit and levity. He promised to be enjoyable company on the long weeks of the voyage. "How old are you then?" I asked. 23, about. Shall we find somewhere drier to sit? The spray, driven up every time the ship's plow plunged into the rough, was coming uncomfortably near us. We left the bow and went along the port gangway, avoiding the sailors, and hoisted ourselves up onto some canvas-wrapped bales of cloth. From this vantage point we could see the coastline ahead, and Lipitor City gradually slipping away to starboard. "Why are they sending you to the Holy City?" I asked. "Because," he imitated the pompous tone of a prelate, "I've shown exceptional prowess in my studies, or so they say. Actually, it's because a distant relative of mine is 4th Prime, and wants all the supporters he can get to enable him to skip a place on the ladder and move up to 2nd when the old Prime finally dies." "The Prime is dying?" Chardon shifted his position, glaring at the loose rope that seemed to be trying to hit him on the shoulder. "Yes, the current personification of Ranthus has reached the span of his years, and will be drawn up to join the gods soon." "Oh, so it's kind of like one of these priest-god things?" "Meanwhile, for the less exalted mortals, there will be a struggle for places. I was fascinated by this glimpse into the private world of the priesthood, collectively known as the Domain. It was a side of them I'd never really thought of before, but which confirmed what my mother had told me yesterday. It seemed like blasphemy even thinking about it." "How will the new Prime be chosen?" I asked. "That's a secret even I don't know," Shahardin said. I might when I get to the Holy City, but suffice it to say that in the end, one of the ex-arch or an under-prime will end up on top, or be voted there, chosen by the powers, whatever. It will probably be quite a hardliner, one who feels that the Domain has grown too lax in its treatment of heretics over the past few years. Not an extremist, though. So then they'll crack down harder on any traces of heresy. Probably. I personally have no time for the zealot wing of Ranthus's worshippers. They're generally narrow-minded fanatics. Heresy should be rooted out, of course, or how will the world function? But it isn't necessary to go looking for it in every nook and cranny. Shahardin sucked in his cheeks, giving his face a hollow look, and rolled his eyes. "Ye are heretics here, cut off from the light of holy Ranthus. You will be cast into the utter darkness beyond the world, and eaten by the demons of the circles of death. If they can stomach you, that is." Chardon collapsed into laughter, and so did I. Two of the sailors nearby looked at us curiously. "Are they really that bad?" I said, when I could talk properly again. "Worse?" said the acolyte. "They're truly terrifying." "We're just rounding the headland to the south of Lipitor," Bumar called down from the deck above us, leaning over the rail. "If you landlubbers want to take a last look, it better be now." Has anybody ever actually said that in sailing anything? To actually call them landlubbers? Seriously? I rushed to the rail as the white walls and towers of the city slowly slid out of sight behind the scrub-covered promontory. Two men collecting the eggs of seagulls from its rocky crevices waved to the parasaur as we went past. Then Lipitor was out of sight, and I had my last glimpse of my home city for at least 3 months. We wouldn't be out of clan territory for a couple more hours, though. Shahardin was, like me, a bit pensive when we'd rounded the headland. Although he was originally from Equotia, Lipitor had been his home for more than 5 years, according to Attack. The Arvach had explained that young acolytes, even those who had the potential to rise to high office, were always sent off for a period of instruction in a remote temple to learn the basic tasks of priesthood. "This should be an interesting voyage, though," Shahardin said a few minutes later. "Much better than when I came out, when I only had a guff-old stick for company." The sun was sinking behind the mountains of the interior, and the land was darkening sharply through shades of red and blue and dark purple. When we finally stopped for the night beyond the end of the clan territory, Bumar's boat was capable of night sailing, of course, but along the next section of the coast a huge coral reef, stretching way out into the open ocean from the continent's shore, made navigation in the dark virtually suicidal. I remembered there'd been a plan 3 or 4 years ago to blast the channel through the reef. My father had been quite enthusiastic, but the oceanographers had pointed out that the end might well snap off and drift out to sea, where it would be even more dangerous. The parasaur glided into a small bay, its edges protected by promontories, and with a beach stretching up toward the small forest. A thick stone wall had been constructed around the landward side, similar to a city boundary. "It's an ether wall," Bumar said when I asked him about it, as the ship lay anchored in the clear water of the lagoon, and the crew were relaxing below. "Sharp eyes you got. The mountain people around here are an unfriendly bunch, even worse than near Lipitor, so your father had the stockade erected to protect the crews from night attacks. We always lay in here, and I've only ever once had trouble from the screaming savages since it went up." "We won't have any trouble with them tonight," one of the sailors said, brandishing a sword. "They use iron for weapons, no match for a good steel blade like this. If you stay awake, that is," Bumar said to the man as he went below. "Well, gentlemen, I'll show you to your cabins. They're the best on the boat, but I'm afraid they're not much. Are you used to sleeping on board ship?" "Not recently, but it's not a problem," I answered. "Every time I'd left a Lipitor before, it had been on our manta, never on the surface ship, but I had spent a few nights at sea in the training boats. My father didn't like it because it was too dangerous if a storm came up." Shahardin shook his head. "I came out on a manta," he said. "There is very little difference from a bed on land unless the weather's bad. Would you care to join us for supper on deck? We'll dine on the fish some of my men caught this morning." "How do you eat when you haven't had a chance to do that?" I asked. "What are we asking here? I am confused. He asked you if you wanted to eat, and then your reply is, 'How do you eat when you haven't had a chance to do that?' Are you talking about fishing? How do you eat if you haven't fished? Is that what you mean?" I'm so confused. But why are you asking a question? Either we land or go hunting, or we eat dried fish, which is just as bad as it sounds. Bumar led us down the companionway at the base of the quarterdeck and along a narrow passageway with 5 doors leading off. Shahardin was in one of the passenger cabins, a small, poky cubicle with a tiny porthole. I, on the other hand, would take over Bormore's cabin, the starboard half of the great room at the end, twice the size and much more comfortable. Saul and his companion, who would be sleeping in the crew's quarters, had dumped their bags earlier. They were now on deck playing cards. Supper was eaten in the cabin opposite mine, the port half of the end room, which boasted a faded carpet on the floor and some battered wooden furniture. It was lit by flickering oil lamps in wall scones, and I could hardly see anyone's face, let alone what I was eating. While the food for officers and crew was being prepared by the ship's cooks, 2 crewmen who'd been instantly nominated by all their fellows, Bormar's deputies, first and second mates, sailing master and pursuer, sat around the table and told each other various tall stories of their or their friends' exploits. Each new fantasy was greeted by a chorus of derisive cheers. I felt that the best one was the helmsman tale of an incident on a pirate ship off Ethna Island. Apparently they had sunk a small trader, but had been spotted by a Cambracian frigate. When the pirate captain had made a run for it, the frigate had given chase, but then had been lured into a hidden shoal on the south coast of the island. The resulting plunder had kept the pirates in business for several months. When it came, the meal wasn't as good as I was accustomed to at Lipitor, but it was passable. Afterward, the talk turned to women. Shahardin didn't seem disturbed by the sailors' rabbled discussion, but then only a few priests were required to be celibate, the Sacri, the Inquisition, and cloistered priests. There was no trouble from the tribes that night, and when we sailed out of the bay in the morning, I thought it had been as if there were no such people. Didn't really serve a point, except that, I hung out with the ship's crew, the meal was okay, and, by the way, not all the priests are required to, be celibate, so, whatever. And, by the way, we didn't get attacked, so it kind of went to the back of my mind that we could be attacked. Setting up for that is really what this is doing, as well as establishing some of the, stuff about the priests. That's really it. That's really the only reason you have, this small, seemingly pointless, break in the whole of the story. What will you learn in the Holy City? I asked. The Parasaur was making its way through wavelets off the easternmost point of Haydn Island, on which lived members of our clan, Lipitor, as well as people of our ally, Clan Kula. To port, I could see a bleak, rocky shoreline rearing up into mountains. A short distance inland, huge piles of boulders spilled down from the mountainsides right into the sea, bare and stark. The shoreline was composed mostly of cliffs. They were stone gray and black. I couldn't see any vegetation or animals for miles in either direction, although inland cloud covered the tops of the mountains, and there was no way to see up there. Bomar interrupted our conversation, which wasn't much of a conversation since she asked a question and then went into a bunch of description. Strolling over from the brazier on deck, which he had been watching intently. "You can see Mount Henson today," the captain said, pointing through a gap at the base of 2 mountains to another which divided sharply about 10,000 feet up, 2 gaunt spires thrusting high into the air a further 5,000 feet or so. "A friend of mine in the Kulin Marines told me there's an ancient castle in the saddle between the peaks." "How ancient?" Shahardin asked. Bomar shrugged. "To judge for yourself, the tribes have been in control of that area since the war. They used to use it, apparently until a lightning storm shattered the walls and the main tower when they were sheltering after a raid." He opened his mouth to say something else, then spotted a rock ahead and sprinted to berate his helmsmen. Interesting diversion, Shahardin said. Proof of the power of Ranthus, though, punishing the barbarians for their refusal to follow him. Despite the number of storms, lightning strikes were very rare around Hayden, and according to my father, all around the Hayden Nurian storm band, as well as the Foresa Liana band below it. It was just another peculiarity of the storms. Why would anybody dispute Rantha's power? I asked as we sat down, as usual, on the bale of cloth below the poop deck. There are some still who believe in the other elements, who dispute the omnipotence of Ranthus and his acts. The very few, but the fear is magnified out of all proposition by the Sakai commanders and the zealot high priests. The very few. I think you mean they are very few. Did somebody not have an editor when he wrote this? Did he not have somebody look over this for him? I mean, surely he did, because other than a few missing words, or maybe going a little long in descriptions, it's fine. Commanders, zealot, high priests, it's only in the archipelago that there are more heretics than believers. Do they pose a threat to the domain? Skies above? No. Shahardin said, it's wrong to dispute the supremacy of Ranthus, fundamentally wrong. That's their sin. But in themselves, that apart, they aren't a threat. The priesthoods of the other four elements fight among each other. There is no organized structure or proper alliance between them. Most of them wouldn't harm the domain anyway, as the exarch in Farasa told me. The problem is that the domain believers' dissent is dangerous, so prefers to try and wipe them out. You need a comma isn't good enough here. I mean, you might be talking about the same people, but you need to restate what you're talking about, because otherwise that's just awkward and doesn't make sense. The problem is that the domain believes dissent is dangerous. So something inserted here prefers to try and wipe them out rather than convert them to the true path. But every heretic burned means another generation will hate us. Is that a widely held view? I asked. A large seagull had landed on the ship's side and had fixed its beady eye on us. We stared back at it, and a moment later it flew off. In the provinces, not on Quotia itself, I believe. There aren't many heretics there, but it's where the holy city and the sacred places of Ranthus are. They send in the Sakai and the Haleti armies to crush outbreaks of heresy there. I remember what my mother had said. Unintentionally, Shahardin had confirmed every last word. But surely if Shahardin and the high priest of Farsa could regard the heretics as mere deviants to be converted, they weren't really such a great problem. So what will you do, or learn in the holy city? I said, repeating my question of a few moments before. I'll study the writings of the prophets of Ranthus, the teachings of the elders, and the interpretations of other sacred texts. Also, the holy city is the only place where they teach the ceremonies and secrets necessary to become an Arvarch. Mostly academic study, then. There is also a physical training program to purify the body. At least that's what they say. I think it consists mostly of hunting down the most beautiful slave girls, judging by the inspectors they sent out, and those who demonstrate exceptional ability and are blessed by Ranthus can become mages, able to channel far more of the power of the gods than ordinary Arvaches. I saw a mage in Farsa, I think a few years ago. I vaguely remembered seeing an unusual-looking priest among the group of high-ranking dignitaries. I was only 6 at the time, though, so it wasn't a very clear memory. They wear flame-colored robes. Yes, it must have been a mage then. He was in a procession next to the king of Farasa. I even know his name, Shahardin said, and grinned. That mage is called Ital. He wormed his way into the king's confidence, and has been whispering in his ear ever since. Another reprobate, and he has a harem of a dozen beautiful slave girls. Is he supposed to? Not according to the prophets, but some teachings of the prophets are ignored these days by everyone except the fanatics. Common sense, really. What's the point of staying celibate even if you are in the service of Rathus? To purify the mind, I suggested jokingly. It's a lot less pure if it has no outlets for the distracting thoughts that occur from time to time, Shahardin said, half seriously. Of course, some of them claim to be so pure that they can ignore such feelings. Those are the dangerous ones. Often they're zealots, or asexual. The worst one is the Sacris, called Lachazar. He is the effective commander of one of the 3 Sakurai chapters. In addition to being unpolluted by worldly thoughts, he believes that the domain should use its armies to enforce religion far more strictly. In effect, he wants the domain to rule the world. How much power does he have? You're learning fast, Catherine. Shahardin grinned. Too much, but at present the second prime and the commander of the Sakurai keep him in check. Since the second prime will almost certainly be elected the new first prime, Lachazar's, however you say that, influence will be contained. With luck, after the choosing, he'll be sent off with 100 Sakurai and told to convert all the tribes in the interior of Husa. Is that the domain's equivalent of exile? More like death, actually. At least from what the Cambristans told me. The barbarians over there are the strongest ever encountered. Outside the territories of the clans themselves, no one dares venture down the coast without a squadron, or into the interior without an army. Despite their seemingly holiness, the domain has ways to get around everything then. Everything, Shahardin said. It's really a very large empire with tiny chunks of territory spread out all over the world, which uses its channel to the gods to further its own interests. There aren't many who actually put Ranthus first. Which type of priest do you intend to be? I don't intend to be a fat, power-grabby prelate, put it that way, the acolyte said, gazing out over the tossing blue-gray waves and the wheeling seagulls. Nor a bigoted, narrow-minded Sacris or Inquisitor. What of you, though? Do you intend to stay as Count in Lipitor all your life? What else would I do? I said, but Shahardin's question had set my mind working, and I began to wonder what it would be like to choose. Lipitor is my clan, and however small it is, it needs government, needs a good ruler. I hope I can be that ruler. If I'm not, then my brother will be. Haven't you ever wished that your life wasn't mapped out that way? I always had the freedom to choose, and even now I've decided to become a priest. There are a lot of options open to me. And even now I've decided to become a priest. There should be a that in there. And even now that I've decided to become a priest, there are a lot of options still, though that still is not necessary, open to me. The nobility aren't supposed to have freedom of choice, but yes, I have wondered what it would be like not to be tied to Lipitor. I joined the Ocean Geographic Guild straight away, I suppose. Was I less adventurous, I wondered, or was it something else? Maybe you've had the sense of duty so firmly instilled that it confines you without your awareness. Still, from now until you ascend to the countship, you'll live some life in the open world. Spend your year as a merchant apprentice, sometime learning to command. My brother's the lucky one. He has a choice of everything, as you did. Still do. About all one can't do in the domain is become a merchant prince. And in 5 years' time, if your father decides to pass you over, think of it. Pass you over for what? Like, just skip you and go straight to your brother? and have him rule instead? Well, I guess, but I don't know if that's how anything works. Could it work like that? I don't know. I bridled slightly even at the suggestion, feeling that I alone was allowed to speculate about that sort of thing. But Shahardin smiled, and I realized he didn't think it would be. By then you'll be second prime, of course. Second? Nothing less than prime for myself, my dear chap. In 5 years? Less! Shahardin's cry of glee alarmed some of the sailors, who, as usual, looked at their strange passengers curiously. We reached Kuel, capital of the only other clan on Hadin, just before sunset on the 4th day after leaving Lipitor. Kula City was the same size as Lipitor City, but built on an island linked to the mainland by 2 causeways that enclosed the surface harbor. There was a small ship in the harbor as well as a fishing fleet, but what drew my attention was something that definitely wasn't a commonplace sight, a war mantra drawn up along a makeshift jetty on the ocean side of town. Work parties were scurrying about on its blue surface, and I saw 3 or 4 huge rents on the polyp armor plating. The green and silver flag of Cambris hung from a short flagpole, limp in the sultry evening heat. It was a hot, windless day, and we'd been becalmed most of the morning, delaying us enough to lose Bomar the chance to finish all his work in Kula in a single day. I'll give somebody enough money for supper ashore. It's too late to trade tonight. We'll do that tomorrow morning, Bomar announced, standing on the poop deck, his eyes darting curiously at the Cumbrasion manta. Will you 2 need it? He asked us, obviously expecting that we wouldn't. Shahardin began to reply, but I cut him off. No, we don't. What time do we sail in the morning? Late morning, about 4 hours after sunrise. We'll see you then, I said, pulling Shahardin along with me off the ship and onto the quay. What's all this about? The acolyte demanded. There's no need to spend travel funds on a night in an inn. Count Courtiers of Kula is an old friend of my father's, and even though he's away, I know his son. We should be welcomed at the palace. I see. I bow to your good sense here. Which way is it? Isn't it obvious? We were standing on the quayside immediately in front of the gate from the harbor to the city. Ahead of us, a wide street ran up to a busy market square. Beyond that was a building with a 5-story tower, the Count's pride and joy. It was the tallest building on Hardin. The stalls we passed going along the main street were packing up for the night, their owners moving merchandise inside and taking down the awnings. Few paid us any attention. The situation was the same in the main square, where all the traders were departing, leaving the 2 marine guards in front of the palace gate standing vigil over the bare flames of the stalls, and a few cats rooting around in the debris. Good evening, master and acolyte, said the guard to the left, a young man I didn't remember from my stay here the previous year, although that wasn't surprising. The storms had been so bad most of the marines had stayed but in their barracks across the street. Master was a title used for strangers whose rank one didn't know, but guessed was higher than your own. May we be of assistance? I am Count Catherine of Lipitor, and this is Acolyte Shahardin, I said. Escount was the title given to a count's heir. Shouldn't you have mentioned that first chapter when you first used it? We're here to visit escort, Hilar. The Count's eyes widened. Oh, wait. My bad. The guard's eyes widened, but his companion nodded and said, Enter, please. The Escount is entertaining the commander of the Lion, but he will welcome your presence. Maral here will take you to him. Follow me, the other guard said, leading us inside the open gates and into a large atrium off to a large atrium off the small courtyard beyond. As we walked through the stone-floored corridors, I relaxed. This was the place outside Lipitor that was most like home, and I had memories of many happy days spent here while the counts were conferring. I hunted, swum, and practiced arms with the count's second son, Karian. Karian was a year older than me, and already embarking on his years of experience as a merchant's apprentice in Tanith. "He's in here," Maral said, stopping outside a bronze-bound wooden door, from behind which came the sound of men's voices, loud and jovial. Evidently, Helor was entertaining the Cambersons right royally. What the okay. Morale knocked on the door tentatively. "What is it?" called a voice quite high for a man's. I recognized Hilar's tone. "It's Count Cathin of Lipitor is here, Your Honor." There was the sound of steps, and the conversation faded into silence. The door was flung open, revealing a thin, brown-haired man of 26 in a royal white robe. What is with the white, green, and brown hair? Really? "Welcome, Cathin," he cried warmly, ushering both of us in. "Too long since I saw you. Who's your friend?" "Acolyte Shahardin, my escort." "He's welcome too." The Escount's eyes narrowed. "Escort to where?" "Tanith. You must tell me why you're going all that way in your father's absence. But first, the introductions." Hylar made a sweeping gesture, taking in the other 3 men in the room, all of whom were sitting around the table. Zan Coral, captain of the Camberson Manta Lion, his deputy Gano, and the trade representative Miss Serac of Mons Ferris. All 3 inclined their heads, while I studied them as politely as possible. Zasan was a powerfully built man with unusually sandy hair and a ready smile. His deputy Gano was black-haired and narrow-faced. Miss Rack was the astonishing one, though. His skin was far darker than that of either of the Cambersons, and his face was a different shape. I knew the Montfertons were black-skinned, but I'd never seen one before. The Escount clapped his hands to summon servants, and ordered more chairs. When they arrived, glasses of wine were poured, and we sat down, as Hilaire demanded to know what we were doing.